Good noon. Thank you for joining us in our new micro series, Jesus in. This week we're going to be talking about Jesus in school. But before that, I want to go back. All of us are involved in school in some way. You have kids in school. You went to school. I've went to school. Barely.
I've
gone to school.
I've gone to school.
Oh,
You've been to school.
your mother is correct.
I only did it.
And I'm actually
You
in school
regularly
right now.
get kids to school.
I regularly get kids to school. If you don't know, I am a bus driver, and I absolutely love driving the kids. Additionally, can't make that mistake again.
Yeah.
Did he tell you about that?
No.
We'll talk about
Okay.
that later. That was embarrassing. But I'm so happy to have your kids again, taking them to school. By the time this video is out, we should have K through 6th grade, which is so exciting.
I'm excited about that too, but for different reasons.
Right.
But talking about school, let's jump into our topic for today, Jesus in school. So when I went to school, it wasn't really a thing. We didn't talk about our faith. Very seldom did anybody really ask about it outside of youth group. So what can you tell me from a family standpoint about Jesus in school?
So I would say the first thing we need to do is acknowledge that we are in Alaska. We're in Anchorage, Alaska.
Well, not everybody might be in Alaska.
And
but
not
we
everybody watching is
physically
going
are
to be
in Alaska.
in Anchorage, Alaska. And this is an issue which will vary drastically across demographics. It's going to vary drastically geographically.
Right.
It was different for you growing up in Virginia and me
Right.
in Albuquerque. It was way different when we were in East Texas when our kids were young.
Well, and when I did high school in Baton Rouge.
Yep.
Versus your high school in North Texas.
All of that
those
is really
experiences. I was
different.
actually thinking about that. Our kids' experience here with school in the last 10 years is so different than it would have been if we were in the South.
Yeah, we're in a much more politically liberal area, at least in terms of school and school engagement, than you and I grew up in. And so there will be differences in the way that we talk about these things. And our goal is to make this broadly applicable, but realize that for the most part, we're talking to families who are involved in that Anchorage area. At least that's our context. And so worth factoring that in.
Yeah.
So if your context is different, so your kids, does this still apply if your children are in Christian private school or homeschool?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really good point. Our context is public school as parents, but we have kids that we work with in homeschool or private school. Fair to say, for the last year in the Anchorage School District, we're all homeschool.
No,
one way or the other.
To say. Not
Okay,
homeschool.
we're all
that
school
is a
at
gifting and a
home.
calling.
Yeah. But yeah, I think this is gonna apply across that broad spectrum. So, yeah.
Okay.
Kick us off, Ward.
So the first point we wanted to make was that you are legally allowed to talk about Jesus at school. This does not mean, and you can correct me here, we're not talking about, is it okay for there to be a general assembly where somebody comes and preaches? We're talking about you in your everyday, ordinary life.
Specifically where you, as a kid or teenager, listening to this discussion, you are allowed to talk about God in your school. And actually, Drew's going to post a link I sent him this morning from a lawyers.org website that talks about the legalities of school and speaking about your faith in school, because there's no reason you guys should just believe us.
And you can check that out in the description below at any point in this video.
Yeah, so we'll post you some good information about it. But as a student in a public or private school in the United States, you are allowed to talk about your faith. It falls under the freedom of speech. You are not allowed to do so in a disruptive manner. And as always, with freedom of speech, you are guaranteed the right to do so, but you are not necessarily guaranteed protection from the cost of how you use your speech.
And I think that's actually an incredible point for all of us. You know,
I bet you that comes up next week too.
Yeah. So go ahead. Sorry.
So I mean, you know, if you spray paint Jesus' love in red spray paint across your teacher's whiteboard, the Constitution prevents your free speech to do that. It does not prevent you being suspended for spray painting anything across your teacher's whiteboard, right? You get in trouble for the ways that we use our voices. But that makes a really good point. and you guys need to hear us say this, at least as a family, and as we have talked about this, we are for the idea that that speech is limited to the students who are there, that that's their world. And our schools are very careful about how they bring in outside forces, outside paid players to speak in schools. In the ASD, that includes being pretty cagey about how they respond to church staff members who would come into schools. That wasn't my experience in the Bible Belt. It was actually kind of eye-opening when we got here. But I will say there are advantages and protections to that.
Yeah, but I will also say to that same point, as a children's pastor, I have volunteered in our children's elementary school for the last 8 years. But I haven't gone as a children's pastor. I've gone as a mom who loves the school and supports the teachers and supports the kids. And then when those kids, I've gotten to teach after school clubs based on character and virtues, and I went before the PTA with my non-faith based curriculum and got to say, hey, can I teach this? And they said, okay. And there were atheists in that group who said, okay, but make sure. And I said, absolutely. I said, but I retain the right that if a child asks me, I get to tell them. And they said, absolutely. So can we still do this? Is their responsibility as parents to get in there and engage and build relationship so that when a teacher's having a hard time or whatever, that you get to build that relationship and speak into that? Yes.
Another way that we see the door wide open, and really probably in a more powerful, engaging, and important way, we see the door wide open to working through our teenagers. You want to tell us just a little bit about Young Life and South?
Yeah, so Young Life, a good friend of mine, Jake, and we played football together. That's how we met. But he has a passion for working with high schoolers, and he recently found an organization called Young Life, which, funny enough, I didn't grow up in Alaska.
Some of us found Young Life like 25 years ago.
Yeah, it's been
Yeah,
around
I
for a
found
while.
Young
It wasn't
When I
25
was
years
in,
ago, it's longer than that, but we don't have to talk about it. It's good.
Yeah, that's older
Anyway,
than me.
go ahead.
But I got to bring it up at least once an episode. Back when I lived in Michigan, everybody was either non-denominational, Baptist, Catholic, Methodist. We didn't really have atheists at the school. For the most part, your family was either one of those categories that I just said. But Young Life was actually one of the youth groups, and I got so jealous of Young Life because all of my friends would go to Young Life, and none of them wanted to go to my youth group. And I was like, what the heck? But Jake recently found Young Life and has gotten involved. And what Young Life is doing is they're going into the schools and they're being around these kids and being mentors and showing them that after high school, there's a place that they can go and they know the people and they can get involved and go into the high schools and start teaching that next generation. As I would say, next generation, it's just a couple of years younger.
Yeah.
But and they're doing a phenomenal thing in Anchorage schools. We have a group that meets on Wednesdays. That's South students, Diamond students, Service students, and some West students, actually.
And Young Life's not alone in that, and not even Anchorage. Youth for Christ is pretty active in Anchorage. There's some others. The point of that being, while we're really excited about partnering with Young Life, the idea there is Young Life is less about preaching in schools and more about teaching our students to, in a valid way, share their faith in schools. And the best part of that is that from a legal standpoint, if it's the students sharing their faith in school, it's completely covered by the First Amendment, and it's completely open to do it. And you'll find very few school administrators or teachers that have a problem with doing that, and those that do don't really have a leg to stand on.
But this goes to our third point pretty clearly.
Yeah, it does.
Guys, adults and kids, if your ordinary life doesn't look like Jesus, keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, if you're the mean kid in school, you don't have to go tell everybody that you're a Christian. Like, work on who you are. And like, we're not suggesting that you be perfect.
No.
Side note, we don't believe any of you is perfect.
Nobody is perfect.
Right?
And there's no shame in that. Jesus took care of that.
And we'll be praying for that.
Thanks.
Drew's delusions, I mean.
Oops.
In all seriousness, though, this is one of those things where the words that come out of your mouth either serve to be magnified by your life, or they are a hindrance to others because of your life. And so as you become more vocal in your faith in schools, as you understand your rights, as you understand resources, as you learn how to do that, all of those things are a moot point if you can't do so with love. You quoted this yesterday.
Yeah, Paul tells us that you can speak truth, but if you're just yelling, it says you're like a clanging gong. If you speak the truth without love, people can't hear it. They can't learn from that. They can't receive that. And so we have to make sure that they perceive the love of Christ from us before they try to receive whatever it is that we're standing for. Is it important for Christians to stand?
Absolutely, yeah.
100%. But
So-
we have to make sure we do it the way Jesus lived and in his example.
So, closing comment, parents, you should absolutely be talking to your kids about how are they standing up for their faith, how are they sharing their faith in school, what are their rights in terms of sharing their faith in school, how can you help them share their faith in school, and when you guys have that conversation as a family, be ready for them to ask you the same thing about where you work.
Yeah. And remember, as we talked in the last series, when we mess up and we stand up and we yell instead of speak in love, apology is a huge thing. Christians mess up too. Own it.
Absolutely. And share your faith.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and
Thanks,
that's all we got for this week. You can check us out next week on the next episode of Jesus In. We have a question for them, don't we? What is the question? Oh, where are your kids?
Yeah, where are your children?
Where are
Do you know
your
where your kids are right now?
Hopefully
they're
they're not on my bus.
Did you clear them?
I hope I cleared the bus. It's going to be real awkward if they're still on there.
Sure needs a new job.
Oh,